Welcome to our conference on U.S. support for Israeli apartheid. I'm Grant F. Smith, Research Director of IRMEP. Since 2015, the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs and the Institute for Research, Middle Eastern Policy have held an annual conference at the National Press Club right before the massive policy conference of AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, to discuss the tremendous negative influence the Israel lobby has over U.S. policy and much more productive alternatives the U.S. should pursue instead. Our array of past expert speakers, like today, has always provided many insights for productive action. So this year's theme is informed and inspired by two factors. The first is the recent This is Apartheid report, released by Israel's leading human rights organization, Bet Shalom. The Bet Shalom report concluded that Israel operates an apartheid regime from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River, a reality Palestinians have long noted and American taxpayers have unwittingly subsidized. Be sure to check out apartheid-related presentations from our first session by Susan Abu-Hawa, John Dugard, and Richard Falk, which are now on YouTube as separate talks. The second factor is the ascent of the Israel lobbying group J Street, which held its own virtual policy conference on April 18 and 19. The group claims it will have a major influence on the Biden administration. But while many Americans conceptually approve of the existence of a self-avowed progressive organization, allegedly challenging the worst policies of AIPAC, relatively few have delved deeply into what J Street actually does. When IRMEP recently looked into how J Street spends its lobbying dollars in congressional lobbying disclosures, much of it, like AIPAC, seemed mostly to be devoted to securing unconditional foreign aid from the United States Congress, along with a great many non-Israel related lobbying objectives as well, such as police brutality and other US domestic issues. And so in the second session of the conference, we'll start off with Philip Weiss of Mondo Weiss, who covered J Street and gives his insight into what this wing of the Israel lobby is really up to. Then we'll cross the Atlantic to hear from Asa Winstanley, who writes for the Electronic Intifada and other news organizations about the rise of self-proclaimed progressive groups that claim to stamp out or that aim to stamp out support for Palestine within the UK Labour Party, which is also happening to the Democratic Party right here in the United States. Tom Suarez, author of the 2016 book, State of Terror, How Terrorism Created Modern Israel, dives into the perennial issue of defining what can and cannot be said about Israel, as he looks at the recent Jerusalem Declaration on anti-Semitism and how it differs from the IHRA and what all that means. Professor Robin D.G. Kelly will give an update on Israel and its lobby's efforts on campus and lessons from South Africa, while Reverend Alex Awad will speak about efforts of Palestinian evangelicals to confront and staunch the spread of Christian Zionism. Antiwar.com editorial director Scott Horton will distill some key related insights from his recent book, Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism, about Israel and its lobby's ongoing support for U.S. military occupations in the Middle East, while Zaha Hassan will discuss her recent Carnegie Endowment for International Peace study on why the Biden administration should adopt a rights-based rather than an Israel-based approach to the Middle East question. So some housekeeping items. For those of you who are participating as Zoom users, we strongly prefer that you use the Q&A feature to submit questions. You see that down at the bottom of the screen. For those tuning in via YouTube, you can email questions to ask@IsraelApartheidCon.org, which is right above the moderators. And Dale and Julia and other moderators, including to me, will then try to group questions so we can get to as many as possible. We also encourage you to tweet any insights about this conference out on Twitter using the hashtag IsraelApartheidCon. So finally, we'd like to thank supporters, speakers, and our virtual attendees for making this possible. I'll now turn it over to Dale Sprusansky, managing editor of the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs, to introduce our first speaker.